Welcome, and thank you for tuning in to episode 98 on the Healthy Runner podcast, where we help you get stronger, run faster, and become a lifelong injury-free runner. And today we have a very informative episode for you all about the tempo or threshold run. And I have one of my highly respected colleagues with me who is also a runner, a run coach, and a physical therapist herself. Welcome to the show, Kristin.
Thanks, Dwayne. Thanks for having me on. I'm super excited.
Yes, I am so excited as well to share you with our healthy runner community. Tempo running, guys, or threshold run is an important component in any runner's training plan. But what is it actually? Kristin is going to explain what a tempo or a threshold run is and how you can use it in your weekly running to run faster on your journey of becoming a lifelong injury-free runner. So Kristin Schulz is a runner, run coach, and physical therapist. As I mentioned, she is the owner of Run Your Life LLC and the host of the Breaking 5, a running podcast. She helps runners reach their next PR without nagging injuries through online run coaching and strength coaching programs. And she also helps running clinicians learn how to write running plans and get their first 2 to 5 online clients. So in this episode, Kristin is going to talk about tempo runs and what you need to know about them. We're going to talk about things like how long is a tempo run? How do you run a tempo run? How fast should you be running a tempo run? Is a tempo run the same as a threshold run? How often should you do a tempo run? And then how do you progress a tempo run? So Kristin, the first question we ask all our guests is, we do a little dynamic warm up here. And, if you can tell, I gave a little brief bio, but if you can tell everyone where you're from and what do you do?
Yeah, so thank you so much for the introduction. Dwayne did very well at introducing me, but a little bit more about me. I'm originally from Kenosha, Wisconsin. I've traveled around quite a bit since then. But yeah, a little background. I went to undergrad, studied exercise science and Spanish, went to PT school, and, have slowly made my transition into the online space like Dwayne has, just out of, frustration of being able to really help runners in a way I wanted to help them in the clinic, which has really brought me to where I am today. And honestly, teaching on the science behind running and, the run coaching side of running in general is like my favorite spots to be teaching about. So I'm super excited to be teaching on that today on the podcast.
Yeah, no, we're super excited to have you. So you're still a cheesehead, right? So like once a cheesehead, always a cheesehead,
always
right?
A cheesehead. Yeah, I'm a Packers fan. I'm not I will root for the Brewers. I'm not a Brewers fan, but otherwise all Wisconsin sports. So
Nice. Yeah, my uncle, I think I told you this before, my uncle's like a huge Packers fan, even though we grew up in Long Island, New York, but he's always been a Packers fan. So his like garage is like decked out in like all Packers memorabilia.
He's a typical
Packers all his passwords are like, Packers 1, Packers 2, like Favre, it's like we make fun of him. It's like he ever forgets his password. It's like, oh, we know what it is. It's like Packers.
And now all the podcasts can do it too. No.
Yeah. So that's a little bit about kind of your background as a PT. Okay. What about like running wise? Like, have you always been a runner? How did you get into running?
Yeah, I started running in high school, mainly just because I needed another sport. I needed a fall sport. And I was like, all right, it was like running or diving. I was like, oh, I'll do running. Sure, I've been pretty good at the mile. So I got into that just as a way to be in shape for other sports. But I ended up loving it, ended up, finding I had somewhat of talent and a passion for it. So I went on and ran in college as well. I ran the steeplechase, which is kind of a fun fact. If anyone else has ran the steeplechase, and the mile 1500 were my main events there. And I've, struggled with injuries myself, actually, a decent amount, which was kind of what also pushed me that way. I was lucky in college. I was pretty injury free. I had a injury. I just kind of ran through the whole time, but just maybe why we are here today, where I am today, coming off a major injury. But I struggled with injuries a lot after college. Honestly, it was just like I could never get into a consistent training cycle, and I'd always be, injured. So that's kind of what brought me to start helping other runners and figuring out for myself to help other runners, and then just also understanding the mindset that it is to like to go through injuries in general. And, I'd been running injury free for about 4 years. And then just last year, almost to the date, we're coming up on the date, I tore my plantar fascia, which was like a traumatic injury. It wasn't related to it was related to running. I had some heel pain from running. And then I went and played a soccer game and ended up tearing the fascia, like pop, couldn't go off the field. It was very swollen. So I've been coming back from that like the whole last year, which has been a whole other journey in itself. That I could definitely talk about, but it's been an insight into like a major injury, like ACL or Achilles tear, anything like that, versus just some running related injuries that I've had in the past. But yeah, I feel like I've kind of had been a runner myself, been an injured runner myself, PT, all that, so can speak to any of it. And this last year just definitely the mindset got me down, being knocked down from an injury. I understand that part after last year. So it was a tough year to be injured. So
yeah, well, that's definitely a tough injury to come back from. So I think, yeah, I'm sure that you can relate to a lot of your clients and have a little different level of empathy, right? Because
yeah,
that mental drain when it's like, running is who you are and it's, how you identify, right? And then when you're not able to do it for a prolonged period, like I know myself, if I go 3 or 4 days without running, it's like, whoa, you're like starting to feel, you get an itch. So I'm sure though, that really helps, you even connect and understand more from like that mental side, like you said, of, almost like losing your identity as a runner. But I think it is so interesting that, myself included, and I think a lot of us kind of PTs who go down kind of the running niche, it usually is because, we have that interest in like rehabbing injuries, but in like basic PT school, you cover a little bit about, yes, these injuries, but not so much like specific for like runners and like how runners train. And I know for me, that was like, the thing that I was like, well, how come, all these runners are getting injured. And then like when I started running, it was like, oh, okay, proximal hamstring tendinopathy. That's what that is. Okay, IT band pain. Oh, that's what, my patients were talking about. And then it was like a quest, that I was like, all right, I'm going to figure this stuff out. And, just kept educating, like I'm sure you did. And, you take courses and then you obviously learn from like personal experience. And I think I'm sure that even aids you more and like arms you more, right, to like work with your clients that you work with, because you've been there before and you've figured out the strategies. Like you said, you've been, running pain-free for 4 years, and like knock on wood, I think it's been probably like 5 or 6 years that like I haven't had literally an injury and like training, straight through. So like, I know like we're just passionate about sharing this information with more people, right? So they can learn the strategies that you and I have figured out over these years as, being a PT as well as a runner. So I'm super excited to have you on today. And Alexis, who's here on the live, says, "Go Badgers." W Madison, she says. So
I am a Badger fan in all regards. So.
Nice. And we got some, I'll give some shout out to Lisa's here on the live. Amanda's here on the live. Coach Kat's here. Coach Whitney's here. April, thank you so much for joining as well. For those that are here on the live, feel free to drop any of your questions in the comment box. Kristen, like myself, we like to engage with you guys. So we love to answer any of your questions. We'll do our best to get to them. Jean's also here. Julianne's here. Susanna's here. Thank you so much for joining. Annie, thank you so much for joining. So we got a nice crew here to learn a little bit about tempo runs. I guess I'll give you guys a little context. If you're listening to this and you're like, I don't even know what a tempo run is, like, yes, we're going to educate you on that. But I have done a training in the past in episode 25 that talked about kind of the main 3 types of runs, your easy run, your tempo run. That was a little brief. Today we're doing a deep dive. And then kind of interval runs. So if you kind of want that overall arching framework of, these different types of runs, check out episode 25. on the Healthy Runner podcast and kind of how fast should you run and talking about those 3 types of runs. And this has honestly been a long time in the making, Chris, and I've like wanted to do a deep dive on tempo runs because there's always a lot of my clients, have questions, and yes, we address these in our one-on-one sessions. But like, this is going to be a super important resource, not only for our clients in our, Healthy Runner coaching programs, but all of our listeners, right, to the podcast. And so let's get into this. If you're ready to do this.
I'm ready. Let's do this.
All right.
Let's do this.
So let's start out with like the simple question is like, what is a tempo run?
Yes. Okay. Well, not to confuse you guys from the get-go, but tempo runs and threshold runs tend to get a little intermixed. So I will kind of hit on differences. For the basics, though, just you don't need to worry about it too much. But the basic of a tempo run is honestly just a run that is ran at a steady pace. Because tempo runs in general, you'll hear about, and tell me if I feel like I'm confusing you, but a lot of times tempo runs, people will be like, oh, I went like on a 45-minute tempo run, or I went on a 30-minute, 20-minute. Really, in regards to what people are going to interchange between tempo and threshold run is a little bit more of what we want to talk about as far as the pacing goes. So I feel like I'm kind of like making that maybe a little confusing from the get-go, but from a basic definition, a tempo is just a constant pace. Now, usually when we're talking tempo, we're talking about running a workout at threshold pace. So what threshold pace is, and tell me again if I'm confusing you, I'm trying to like keep it as simple, but threshold pace is training at a pace that is, when we run, you've probably heard about like, and again, I'm probably going too sciencey right away, but we'll just, whatever, just let me know. When you've probably heard of like lactate before accumulating, right? Blood lactate in your system, or hey, a runner's like, oh, I felt the lactate in my legs, or I don't know if you've heard of that before. I know I have, even just as a runner when I was in high school and stuff. But basically what happens is that we have a threshold where our body cannot clear lactate. Okay, I'm going in science. I didn't mean to go this deep, but I just went. Sorry, guys, I went deep on you right away. But there's a point at which that as you're running, you need to clear this lactate, and there's a point at which our body cannot. So when we're doing this specific training, what we're doing is we're training like right at or right below this level. So we're training our body to clear the lactate, the blood lactate, so that it's not accumulating and it can allow us to go further and run faster. Again, you don't need to necessarily know all that, but that's just kind of, if you want to know that, there you go. But that goes back to when we're talking about a threshold pace, the pace that you're running at is a very specific pace that is going to be about at this level where you are clearing lactate. So that's like kind of the more, I went in the sciencey. I wasn't planning to go that deep right away, but I don't know why I just jumped there. Sorry, Dwayne.
No, that's fine. I just want to kind of clarify for those following along here. So what you're saying, Kristen, is that the tempo run, number one, is right off the bat, we're distinguishing a slight difference in a tempo run is just running at a steady state for any length of time. Mm-hmm. And a threshold run is getting to that point, like you said, right before you would not be able to clear lactate out of your system, mm-hmm. right? So making a little distinction there between kind of terminology, and we can kind of get into a little bit more of that, but just kind of from the get-go, this tempo run is this steady state running. And you did mention that it will help you run faster. So this is used as a tool to basically enhance our speed, right? Mm-hmm. So something that usually, if you're just starting out running, you started running last week, 2 weeks ago, last month, like kudos to you. Congratulations. We love beginner runners, but this might not be the best type of run for you yet, right? Mm-hmm. So get a little bit of kind of what we call our base training in, that you're running at an easy pace and getting some miles in. But when you're ready to start increasing your speed and you've been doing all of your runs at the same pace, and we'll get into this on what exactly pace you should be running, then this is when you want to start to think about, right? adding in and incorporating this tempo run into your training. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. After we have a good base, this is going to be one, along with the intervals, like you shared earlier. These would be the two different types, in a most basic program that you would end up adding in. But definitely want to make sure you have a base before you go into any like tempo or threshold run.
Okay. So now that we've established it's the steady state running, how long is a tempo run? Like how long of a duration? Does it matter?
So again, and I don't really want to like confuse you because other people will have like different, definitions and everything. But like the most basic, say like tempo run, that is going to be clearly at this like threshold pace, this like ideal pace that we're going for when we're actually like training threshold, is 20 minutes. I mean, now again, depends on who you talk to. If any of you guys have ever heard of Jack Daniels before, he's a very well-known, I mean, a lot of, if you ever ran like high school or, ever worked with a lot of high school coaches, will be like, oh, I listened to Jack Daniels. It's a very well-known running physiologist. But he, like, according to him, he'll be like, hey, a tempo run is technically 20 minutes. Anything over that, it's like technically not exactly a tempo run. But you're going to hear in the, you probably, if you go to like a local running group, they're going to be like, hey, I'm doing a 30-minute tempo today. I'm doing a 20-minute tempo. I'm doing a 40-minute tempo. You're going to hear of a lot of different times. And I just wanted to say that to clear it up, because it can get confusing, because if you do a 20-minute tempo, you do a 40-minute tempo, they're not going to necessarily be at the same pace. But overall, this like threshold pace, which is a very specific pace to like specifically train your body to clear lactate, is usually at a very specific pace, if that makes sense.
No, that does. Thank you for clearing that up. And so really what I heard, basically 20 to 30 minutes of this kind of steady state running. So how does one go out for a tempo run? Like, how do we do that? How do we, like, you have a client that's, hey, today's my first day running a tempo run. Like, what do you tell them?
So the easiest, I think there's a couple of different ways, and it will depend on like a client's background and how they learn best. Personally, I think the easiest way is, one, we're making sure they have a base, right, established. And then if they have a recent race, or if they've done like a time trial, say if they've done like a 5K time trial, what I'll do is I'll estimate their pace for this tempo run so that they can kind of know about where they should be. And for anyone listening, and again, just say if you think this is too much or whatever, Dwayne, I find the easiest way that you could also use if you're just listening and if you're not working with a coach or whatever, is there's an app called B.02 that I find super easy, because you can just plug it in. It will tell you what pace you should go at for a threshold or tempo run. So that's like the easiest way. Like if you have a Garmin and everything, let's say you don't have a Garmin, you didn't do a time trial. Let's just say you showed up and they're like, hey, we're doing a 20-minute tempo, and you have no clue what that really means. What you want to do is you're going to go at a pace that's like, it's moderately hard. It's about, if you use the scale 0 to 10, rating of perceived exertion scale, about a 6 to 7, really about that 7 out of 10 hard. It's at a level that you wouldn't be able to have a conversation during. Maybe during the first few minutes you can. Obviously, the more fit you are, I'm sure you can still talk, but really you don't want to talk during this. But it would be just past the point where you wouldn't want to talk anymore. It's not as hard as like, oh, there's no way I'm even getting a word out. Those are some markers you can use if you can't use pace. A lot of times I will, again, going back to the beginning, I'll use pace just to give people an idea of where it's at until they learn like what it feels like. But otherwise you can go off the feel, which again, like 6 to 7 out of 10, or think that it should be kind of, moderately hard, just over that comfortable level that you get with EC running.
Perfect. Yeah, I use the same calculator with my clients, the VDOT calculator, and I just dropped, for those that are on the Facebook Live, I just dropped that link in the comment box so you guys can get an estimate. If you put in a recent race time, you can actually find out what your tempo or threshold, really threshold pace is. And I know Coach Lou's talked about that before when he kind of did his episode on pacing. So we kind of reference that same calculator, and that's what I use for my clients. So those listening on the podcast, I will drop that link in the show notes as well. In case you aren't familiar, there are many different calculators out there, by the way. This is one, like Kristen said, by Jack Daniels, and that's the one that, Coach Lou and, I use. I've used others before, but I've been using the VDOT calculator really pretty much the last year, and I've been happy with it, to give you an estimate. And just remember, it's an estimate. Like Kristen said, if you're just starting out, I definitely go by feel, more so than pace, because you're kind of guessing a little bit at this estimate. And until you actually do them, you're not really going to know, are you working in that 6 to 7 range out of a scale of 10? And I think that's kind of the important part. And I think really what Kristen's talking about here is we're going faster than your easy pace. So you should be working at a 6 or 7. It shouldn't be conversational, right? So you really shouldn't be able to talk sentences at this point, but you're not huffing and puffing working at an 8 or 9, or like going at race pace, right? That isn't what Kristen's talking about for this pace. Okay, so you have your pace, and then so with your runners, do you have them go out and do a specified mile or so at easy pace, and then you have them do their tempo run? How do you format your tempo runs?
Yeah, usually I'm going to have a warm up. Usually the minimum I'll have someone warming up is 10 minutes, really. So depending on, their pace, that could be a mile or whatnot, depends on their easy running pace. But at least 10 is like the minimum I find, especially with adult runners. I mean, I know as I've gotten older, I need more of a warm up. So,
oh yeah,
really anywhere 10 to 20 minutes warm up, definitely warm up, make sure you warm up and do any other, warm up drills you've been given. And then you go into this tempo run. So let's say it's 20, let's say it's the basic 20-minute tempo run. You can do 20, the last 5 minutes are going to be, get in there, it'll be kind of hard. And then you're going to cool down. You're going to want to cool down for at least 10 minutes as well. So the very basic, like that's what it looks like. I mean, it's a pretty quick workout, which is kind of one nice thing about it. And you feel pretty good afterwards. You got some hard work in.
Nice. So it's like a sandwich. It's like you got your like bread on the outside, right? That's your like easy mile kind of warm up run at your easy pace. And then in the middle, the meat or whatever you got in your sandwich, if you're, a plant-based runner, then you maybe got some like, meatless, stuff in the middle there.
Burger.
There we go. We got an impossible burger in the middle. That's your tempo run that you're going at this faster pace, working at a 6 to a 7 out of 10. And then you finish you don't just stop after that and like hit the shower, right? You got to do actually a mile or 10 minutes, right? On the back end of that where it's easy. So it's almost like this run is sandwiched in the middle of like your easier running, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And it's a really good place to start if you're new to running too, for like speed, a type of running that's faster than your easy runs, right? Because this isn't quite as fast as interval runs. So it can be a kind of nice place to start to learn how to do a tempo or threshold run.
Yeah. And I think, there are definitely some different philosophies on this. And I've had other people on the podcast come on that may start intervals earlier. I am more of the mindset like you, it sounds like, that especially from like an injury standpoint and like allowing the body to adapt to faster running, as opposed to going, from running slow to running fast, kind of working that pace up. I know some that, for beginner runners, they have them doing interval type work. I would just caution, and that honestly, I've seen so many injured runners that a lot of our watches and our apps do that for beginner runners. If you're doing like a beginner marathon training program or half marathon, they'll have you doing intervals. And I just feel like a lot of people wind up getting injured because their body hasn't adapted yet to like faster running. So there are some different philosophies out there, just so everyone is aware. And I know some coaches that actually do interval work, but probably not at that 8 to 9 effort level. It's probably lower where you're not running as fast. But I utilize it like you do, Kristen, where, I take someone who has that base established, and let's just say someone hasn't run for, 6 months, or they haven't run during COVID, right? Very,
Yeah.
situation
Impossible. Yeah.
that comes up. And they're just getting back into running. Then I'm going to have them do a training cycle for 3 or 4 months with just easy running, like gradually building up the mileage, right? Gradually building up their long runs before I even add in, this tempo running. And then I use that to kind of kick off interval runs. Do you do the same?
Yeah, I'll usually, so like what I'll use, it depends on the runner, but I'll usually do honestly, like I'll do a threshold one week and then the next week I'll do interval. But if someone is coming off and they're injured and I don't know if their body's quite ready to be like at interval pace, like maybe I'll still have it at threshold. But a lot of times I'll start it off where, and I think this was like gonna be maybe something you'll ask me too, but I'll do like 1 week threshold and then 1 week interval, 1 week threshold, 1 week, interval, versus having both a threshold and interval in the same week, which is what, once you're running more days, more advanced, what a program will look like. But again, like Dwayne said, like everyone has different opinions. And I think me and Dwayne, coming from working with injured runners, might have a certain opinion versus like a coach that's working with just runners. Maybe they're not really working with a ton of injured runners. Might be a little bit of a different perspective. And even like the beginning when I was like, oh, tempo versus threshold, like you're going to hear this like used and interchangeable, and like other people have different terminology. So that's just kind of why I threw that out there too. So if you hear it,
Right. Okay. Perfect. And so we talked about, pacing and effort level. Are there other ways you tell your runners like how fast they should be running their tempo runs versus, they're working at a 6 to 7? Do you have anyone go by heart rate ever, or not so much?
I honestly haven't really coached anyone off heart rate, but I have done them off heart rate. This is probably one of the most valuable runs to do off heart rate if you do want to do it off heart rate. Do you mind if I go into heart rate a little bit?
Sure.
I mean, again,
Go
this is
for
a
it.
little maybe more advanced, and if you're just starting out, like you don't need to worry about this. But if it's something of interest to you, one benefit of training off heart rate is there. And now you might not always do this with heart rate, but one of the best things you could do for like heart rate training is you actually can get, we're talking about lactate here, right? So you actually could get your blood lactate tested. Like you can go through this test. And I do know like some PTs that do this and run coaches. And I've thought about like, I would offer this. I just have to go to like buy this like land slightly you have to get. But basically you can go through this test where you're either increasing an incline or increasing speed on a treadmill. And it's going to show you where your blood lactate, your lactate threshold is, which is what we're talking about, right? And I could go in more details about that, but basically I just tell you we can figure that out. But then what you can do is you're wearing a chest strap with, take your heart rate, and you can actually know exactly where your heart rate is, about an estimate for your threshold. So if you did actually have that done, then you could be training at your threshold, like actually based off a test that's actually showing you where your, granted it's on one day of this test, but still it's going to be the most accurate thing we have, where your, your lactate threshold is at. So that's where this could be very, very helpful if you train by heart rate. And then you can figure out your easy runs from there, you can figure out your intervals, all that stuff. But we trained like that in college. They would test us in college, and I found it super helpful. I really liked it. I think it like helped me learn threshold, because now I can go run a threshold. Like I don't need to watch for a threshold run. I know what it feels like, and it's usually pretty spot on. It's very, another thing about a threshold run, once you do this for a while, it's very much, I mean, if you're at the same fitness level, like you're like in like a 5-second gap here, like there's a big difference between, say, being at like 650 versus 7-minute pace. Like there's just like, there's very much this sweet spot when it comes to threshold running. Not going to feel it right away. It'll take time. But as far as like going back to the original question of heart rate, I think it is useful. It's just not a lot of people necessarily want to. Most people these days, you have it on your watch, but that's not always the most accurate. I wouldn't like rely on the watch. Granted, they're not that bad, honestly, but again, but like to be really accurate, you'd want to have like a chest strap to do it with. But yeah, that's my thought on threshold.
Right. Yeah, no, I agree. The first thing is the wrist, based heart rates are not as reliable as if you
Mhm.
have the chest strap. So like I know my Garmin, like I have the chest strap, which I do find to be more reliable. And like you said, most of the time it's pretty much spot on, I would say.
Mhm.
I definitely noticed when I forget to put my chest strap on, I go out for a run and I check my wrist.
You're
It's
like, oh,
definitely not
not the same.
accurate at times. So, and I get some runners who are just like perseverate on that number on
Hmm.
their heart rates. They've been told or they read, hey, my heart rate should be here. And I'm like, well, you're not even actually accurately, reliably like tracking your heart rate. So don't get,
Yeah.
go by feel. And I think what Kristen's really talking about is as you gain experience as a runner, it's most important to actually learn how these different paces feel. And so, in your training during your week, you are actually running certain runs at this pace, at this, today we're talking about threshold versus, running it at easy or running it at interval pace. Like you're actually think you're doing a threshold run or tempo run, but you're actually running it at your interval pace. And when you do that, you actually jump over, you cross the line, right? You go into the interval zone, which now you've exceeded that lactate threshold that Kristen was talking about. And now we actually go into anaerobic training.
Hmm.
So you're not going to maintain that for a long period of time. And how we usually program these out is, these might build on each other. You might actually add a mile or two. And then we can kind of talk about other more complex progressions. But to keep it simple right now, for everyone who's just like looking to actually start doing tempo runs or implementing them into their training, right? You want to be able to actually hold that pace that's faster than your easy pace for a mile. Let's say I might build in someone's program for a week, second week, third week, maybe, and then you do 2 miles. Right. And then possibly, depending upon your pace, as you alluded to, you might do 3. So you got like a 5-mile run, 1 mile easy, 3 miles sandwiched in the middle at this faster tempo pace that you're going at, 6 to 7 out of 10 range, and you're able to hold it. And like being able to hold it, I find is just so key, especially for racing. Like if you're really looking to improve your race time, whether it's really anything, but I would say in particular, definitely like 10K, half marathon and marathon
Yeah.
time. And you're looking to get a PR, or you've been like stagnant in your running. And it's like, you're just hitting the same exact race time. And you're like, how do I get faster? And you haven't incorporated these runs. Like listen to Kristen, like start incorporating these and you will see some like significant changes in your running, and by having that kind of dichotomy in your, running pieces during your week.
Yeah. And I feel like if any type of training isn't going to be, I mean, most plans should have threshold and interval, but if anything's not going to be in there, it would be this threshold or tempo runs in the sense of, people do, oh, I do intervals, or even a high school runners. I mean, I know of high school programs I've heard about where it's like, you're just like, if you guys have like a, daughter or son in high school, like they're just doing intervals, like repeats. If you never did any threshold run, like you're missing out big time on the gains that you need as a runner. You need some days at this lactate threshold, you need some at this pace, you need some at the intervals that are working on your aerobic capacity, on your what am I trying to say right now? Your oxygen consumption, your max O2, like your VO2 max that you hear terms about too, and that's a whole nother topic, but
Okay.
you need them all. So
Yeah. So, and I think you kind of addressed this question off the get-go, but you tell me if I understood you correctly. As far
mhm.
as, is the tempo run the same as the threshold? I guess it all depends upon how fast you're running that tempo run during that 20 to 30-minute period. If you're
Yeah.
running it at that threshold pace before you kind of cross over the line and get into anaerobic zone and you're still aerobic, then they could be used interchangeably. Is that correct?
Like tempo and threshold, you're saying?
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess like the only reason I kind of like brought that up at the beginning is just like so short answer to answer, like, yes, they're usually used interchangeably. You'll hear like, hey, we're going on a tempo run today, or we're doing a threshold run. A lot of times it'll be a tempo run. But for anyone that's like doing longer distances, and maybe you're like, oh, I'm gonna do a 40-minute tempo, just to put it out there that like that wouldn't necessarily be at, like, let's say you use the speed auto 2 calculator and you find your threshold pace. You don't want to go do a threshold at that pace. Technically a 40-minute is usually going to be at a slower pace. You're going to adjust it for something that long. But if you're that far, you're obviously, this isn't the beginner level of doing something like that.
Okay. No, that makes sense. So if you're going over 20 or 30 minutes, then you're going to have to actually decrease your pace from that threshold pace you found in like the calculator. You're actually going to need to go a little slower, not as slow as your easy pace, but you're going to have to drop that down in order to be able to sustain essentially that pace for the duration that you're doing, whether it's 40 minutes or 50 minutes.
Yeah. And again, this could differ depending on who you talk to. Like, this is just, how I've learned. This is like, again, going back to like Jack Daniels, like I bring that up just because there's a lot of people out there, but it's a common person that people will follow, or you might hear the name of. That's what, they will say. But overall, I like think of it more as like, there's this overall threshold, this pace of this threshold, like we're talking about. And then like tempo runs are like one type of run you can do. And then like another one is you can do threshold intervals, which is basically kind of what Dwayne, like you, and like this is what I start people with too, is like in the beginning, like you start out, well, probably like 1 mile threshold, right? But maybe you do 2 by, 2 by a mile. Or what I'll use a lot with my clients is 5 minutes at threshold pace, then they'll rest for a minute, and then they'll do 5 minutes, and then they'll rest a minute. So in a way, it's kind of like, repeats, but it's repeats at this threshold pace, not at a interval pace, which is a faster pace.
Yes.
So there's like this overall theme of a threshold, and then you can do that different ways, either like split up into intervals or do like a steady state, like tempo, where it's just steady state, running.
Yeah. So what Kristen's really talking about is so now we're going to start to get into a little bit more complex. So for, again, those who are listening, who are beginners starting out, like literally you can probably stop at this point, and just take in what we've said so far and start implementing that into your training. So now we're going to kind of go a little bit deeper, and make things a little more complex. If you guys are ready for it, just because there are many variations to what Kristen already presented. And I don't want to confuse like the beginner runner and be like, wow, this is so confusing. Like, I don't even know how to take action and implement like a tempo run. Right. So like you literally could like just shut this off right now, and, take some notes down and be like, okay, I'm going to start doing a tempo run. I'm going to, go out there for 1 mile in the middle. I'm going to figure out what my threshold pace is. I got the calculator now, and, you can start implementing that. So for those that have done tempo runs before, or these threshold runs, now let's kind of talk about some of these variations. So I think the first variation, this was actually Coach Lou actually just jumped on the live here. What's going on, Coach? This is something he introduced to me because I did the RRCA running certification. Coach Lou did the VDOT, coaching certification. And this is where he kind of educated me on some of these intervals and actually breaking it up. And I've started implementing with some of my clients, which have been helpful as an introduction, which you're kind of alluding to in the beginning, where you can be able to do, 1 mile, and then you have this little bit of recovery to not only provide a little bit of heart rate to come down, so you're not jumping over that line we talked about before, but also to give you a little mental break as well, which can be effective for some runners. Or if their pace is slower, right, and you don't want them to go over that 20 or 30 minutes, that we could start breaking these up essentially into these different intervals to be able to run at that threshold pace that you're talking about.
No, exactly. It's like, just like you were saying, for a couple different reasons. It could be for like the mental aspect, right? Like, one, like the most basic workout we can do is like a 20 or 25 minute, tempo run. If we do that like every week, it's going to get kind of boring after a while. Granted, really that's all we need to get faster. Like, training doesn't need to be complicated, but for our mental space, it can help. But this is where it can give you that little mental break. It feels a little easier. I feel like even, just having a 1-minute break in between these segments. But also it can allow you to actually do more threshold work in one sitting, right? Like maybe you do, instead of doing like 20 minutes of this, you're doing 30 minutes because you're breaking it up and it's easier on the body. Your body can withstand it a little bit better and recover, because recovery is part of the getting faster process. It can recover better by just having that like 1-minute break between, let's say we're doing 5-minute intervals, which is the most common one I'll do with my clients.
Nice. Okay. That makes sense. That makes sense. And then, so how often should we be doing tempo runs?
So, I mean, there's no, should or whatnot. I tend, like, just basically how I tend to do it is I'll do a tempo run. Well, again, going back to who you're working with, a lot of clients who, let's see, like if you're listening on here and you're new to running, a lot of times you might see, tempo or threshold 1 week and then interval the next, and kind of like varying back and forth. Again, if you are training more seriously, or you've been training longer, your body withstands more, you might do some sort of threshold and some sort of interval every week. And in that, if that's the case, then every week, it doesn't have to be this way, but a lot of times how I'll do it is like 1 week will be a tempo, next week will be some sort of threshold intervals, meaning maybe they're going to do 5 by 5 minutes at threshold with 1 minute rest in between, or maybe we're going to do like 1K threshold repeats. That's another one I'll do a lot of, but I'll go back and forth between some sort of like more tempo and some sort of more repeat. I mean, there's a lot of different type of workouts I could talk about too, if you want to, like different types you might see. We can go into that if you want. Don't have to.
Yeah, no, I think that's helpful to maybe think about as the beginner novice runner. If you're alternating weeks, I think that's definitely a good start. Or if you're not alternating with intervals, then maybe doing once a week. Definitely not more than once a week. I think again, from Kristen and I's background, it's, you have to gradually build the body up in a safe way, right? And we want to be a lifelong injury-free runner, and that's how we're going to do it. For many of you who are a beginner and starting out, one of the most common mistakes beginner runners make is that they're running all of their runs too fast, believe it or not, because
usually you're running at threshold pace. Can I just say, almost all people that, even like I have a client that, he's a PT and I'm teaching him how to run programs now. And I see this all the time. They're actually like, their easy runs are at threshold pace, they find out. But yep. Sorry, I totally just interrupted, but I got excited about that.
No, thank you. Because it's like the biggest thing we harp on, all of our programs and our clients is, those easy runs, like slow down. If you're always running in this gray zone, the tempo or the threshold pace is kind of like the gray zone of between, like, easy running is slow, interval is like fast. You're running fast. You're like huffing and puffing, right? You ain't talking no sentences. And the tempo's in the middle. It's like that gray zone. But we find that so many new runners are running in the gray zone. And when the problem is, when you're in the gray zone, you don't actually see those gains because you don't have that dichotomy that I talked about before in your training and in your conditioning. And like Kristen said, every run has a specific purpose. And, that easy run is that aerobic capacity, like that base training and just being able to build up more mitochondria and exchange oxygen, right? And as this threshold, as Kristen is saying, it's taking you up to that threshold so you can actually filter out more out of your muscles and you become more efficient. So like at a race, like if you think about that point of your race, and especially after like my kind of goal half marathon still like in my head and feeling that discomfort that you feel in a race, it's like that ability to turn that stuff over so your muscles aren't like totally, spazzing out on you, right?
Yes.
It's these runs that are going to get you there versus those faster anaerobic runs, which have their place and have their benefit for like leg turnover and even like muscles and helping running form, right? Getting your legs to kick over quicker. So every run has a specific purpose, and there is a purpose for this threshold run. And you should be doing it basically once a week or once every other week if you're just starting to do some type of faster running.
Yeah, no, there's always a purpose. And just, to reiterate on that, like in training in general, and I'm sure you talk about this with your clients all the time, like you need to stay in the paces that are prescribed. Like this isn't like, I know runners were like go-getters and it's like, well, I want to do better, and if I'm going faster I'm doing better, but like the point of training is like very specific physiologically. Like I was kind of going to, doesn't matter if you got it or not, but if you want to know, like went into the basis of why we're doing this, like there's a reason what we're training in your heart for this, right? Same thing when you're doing speed work, and there's different types of speed work you can do. There's a very physiological reason you're actually doing this. So going faster, all it's doing is breaking down your body more and making it harder to recover, making you actually not get faster a lot of times. So just to reiterate that, stay within what's prescribed, and faster isn't always better in workouts. Yes, in races, go for it, but not in workouts.
Yeah. So yeah, if we can actually finish up, I think, you just communicated that great. And I think this is going to be super helpful for many runners who are listening to this. But now let's take like the half marathon or a marathon runner who, has been doing tempos for many training cycles. They're doing interval work. What are some ways that you like to progress a tempo run, or, kind of go to that next level on someone who's looking to get that half marathon or marathon PR?
Yeah, no, this is good. And I think this is where, like, kind of where I was distinguishing at the beginning probably mattered more. Like I could have said this now, because this is where a lot of times with like marathon or half marathon training plans, you'll see different types of like tempos and stuff. So I'll talk about that a little bit more. If you got confused earlier, sorry, that's totally my bad. But this will, I think, be helpful. So some common ways I like to, progress it. One way is going to be doing something called a cut down run. Now, a lot of this actually, like I've learned, but I've also picked up from different coaches, whether, some of the stuff I picked up from when I had, coaches in college, but then, post college, all this stuff. It's done different ways depending on the coach. But one thing I really like to do, just to put that out there, but is like a cut down run. So that's another way you could play with, kind of in this threshold zone. But again, it's going to look a little different. So this might look like something like a 30-minute cut down run. Now, a cut down run can't be a tempo run technically, because again, tempo is at a steady state, right? So this, if we're cut down, because we're going to get faster, is what I'm going to describe. It's not really technically threshold. So when we do these different types of runs, they're partially for physiological benefits, but they're also a little bit mental, a little bit getting your pacing down, adjusting to different paces throughout a race, right? So a cut down run, one that I will do will be something like it'll be 30 minutes long, and you'll cut down every 5 minutes, like you'll cut down. So like, and I'd have to actually look up exactly what I give, but like, let's say your average threshold pace is like 7 minutes. That's where you're supposed to be, 7 minutes a mile. So maybe you start at like 7:20 pace. I'd have to actually look at exactly what this might look like. And then every 5 minutes you get 5 seconds faster. So it's like 7:20, then you're going 7:15, then 7:10, 7:05, 7, every 5 minutes. And then technically you're at 7 minutes, but then you're going to go a little faster for the last little bit. So you're playing around with speed a little bit more. It's not really technically threshold when you do something like this, but it's in that zone. It would count as a like threshold like workout, right? So that's like one type. Another type would be something similar that we already kind of talked about, but it'd be like a 40-minute, maybe steady state, like a tempo run. But again, like let's say your pace is 7 minutes. I'm just like saying that to keep it easy, but it's gonna be like at 7:20 pace for this whole 40 minutes instead. That might be something you'll see. Another thing that you'll see, especially in like half marathon and marathon pace, is doing like half marathon pace runs or doing marathon pace runs, especially maybe in the long run where you're doing a up pace. You're not doing easy runs. If let's say it's like, sometimes it could be as much as like, it can be much more, but even like, 8 to 10 miles at marathon pace, or, half marathon pace, you're doing like 5 miles at half marathon pace. Now, these are technically like tempo runs at this point, because we're staying at this steady pace for a certain amount of time, but they're not at threshold pace. So that's like where I wanted to kind of distinguish so you don't get confused, because you're going to keep this steady state. And a lot of this, like if you're doing like half marathon pace or marathon pace, they can be very common in programs, but from a physiological standpoint, a lot of times it's more about the psychological standpoint, like getting you ready to be at marathon pace, know what it feels like. It's not as much like, oh, we're training your lactate threshold, or we're training your why do I keep VO2 max? Why am I forgetting this most simple word today? VO2 max words you guys like a lot. Over your running economy, it like doesn't actually have that. It's a lot more of like a psychological, like get used to running at like marathon pace or half marathon pace. So that's something you'll see a lot. I'll tend to do things like 2 miles at threshold. I like to give my runners like 2 minutes off because that's a pretty long one, but 2 miles at, a threshold pace, 2 minutes off, 2 miles at threshold, 2 minutes off. That's a lot of times where it starts, but like if you're really advanced, you might be doing like at least 3 of those in a row. Something like, again, this is like half marathon training. Things like that are going to be like some more of like the advanced things you're looking at and things you're going to see in marathon, half marathon training plans. So
yeah, and
that helps.
I think those have been actually super helpful for me personally. I shared with many of you, my latest half marathon time being like the fastest in, 5 years and 15 tries. But that's where I really started incorporating exactly what you're saying, is for, weekly tempo runs. It kind of turned into that where it was like 2, miles at threshold and then a 2-minute kind of recovery and then another 2 miles. And then I alternated weeks. Coach Lou had me alternating weeks where, 1 week it would be that tempo run or threshold run. And then the next week he would incorporate it into the long run, where I was going, in that long run, I would do, whatever, 4 miles at easy pace and 4 miles maybe at marathon pace, and then 2 miles at tempo pace, and then a mile, at 2 miles at the threshold, and then a mile, easy at the end to recover. And I really felt like that really made a difference in my training, and in my running fitness. I think that was huge. So for those that have built up the weekly mileage, have built up your long runs, and you haven't, and you're healthy, I will, state that as well. You're doing your strength training in order to run. You're healthy. Then like these workouts that Kristen's talking about is like, I think exactly what you need to kind of take you over that hump to get faster for that half marathon race, for that marathon race. I personally have seen that, and I've implemented that with many of my clients, and I've seen some great results. The one person I would caution is that runner that's still building up, and you're coming back from, maybe, just running lower mileage, and you really haven't run, let's say you're half marathon training and you don't have a lot of 10-mile runs under your belt in the last 6 months. For your first 10-mile run or even your second 10-mile run, honestly, I don't recommend splashing in, threshold.
No.
You have to be, stretched out, so to speak, or have this base level of training, where you've done, a bunch of double-digit runs, and it's like easy for you. You don't feel you recover quickly from like an easy 10-miler or an easy 12-miler, and you're recovering well from those. And now you can actually add in some of these progressions that Kristen's talking about. So I found those super helpful. Like that was the first time I've ever done that, and it was like amazing. I love it.
Hard at the time, probably. But
hard, and like you said too, it just mentally a little bit more stimulating. And it's like gets you up for that challenge, just like interval work does. Like I like hitting the track and like getting in those hard track workouts, and it just mentally stimulates you, and it kind of pumps you up for like your week. And it's like, okay, I need to make sure like, hey, I'm game on here. And those days of the easy run, it's like, hey, if I got a little less sleep, didn't eat as great, I'm a little like sluggish, like that's okay. I'm going to be going at easy pace anyway. Like I don't need to feel like 100% for those, but I made sure that, hey, I was feeling like good for those, interval days or these, longer runs with this threshold pace splashed in during it. So those have been very nice. Is there anything else that you kind of wanted to share with our listeners about this? And I love how you distinguish that too, by the way, with like tempo runs, and because I definitely use them interchangeably because like so many people do, but I think I really like how you highlighted that it is that threshold pace, right? Like that's the key. And that you could have tempo runs that are longer. Basically, if it's
Yeah.
longer than 20 or 30 minutes, it's not a threshold
Yeah.
pace
Yeah.
run
Yeah.
anymore.
Yeah.
It could be called a tempo run, but it's not
Yeah.
at threshold pace.
Yeah. Yeah. I just, I feel like it's when you're new, especially, and you hear that, and maybe you heard this episode and you're like, oh, threshold pace. Like, I wouldn't want you to go out there and like run it at 40 minutes at this pace or something. Like, just, just to distinguish that can be helpful. So, but yeah, nothing really more. Unless like, and I don't think we need to, but I was like, unless you wanted me to go more into like the blood lactate, testing, or the only other thing I would say would be, I mean, I guess we really hit on it, was just like those, lactate, the threshold intervals, which, describe those a little bit better, especially for this later half of, more advanced maybe runners, if you're listening. A lot of times what that will look like, I kind of said it already, but it might be, a lot of times I like to do like 1Ks or 5 minutes at threshold pace and then 1 minute off. And a lot of times it's going to look like anywhere from, for like the average runner, like 4 to 6 reps of these, right? That you can do instead of your threshold run or your tempo run, just as something for variety. If you've never tried these before, definitely do them. Like I didn't learn about these until college. Like we didn't do them in high school, but like it was every other week we'd always do like tempo one week, and then it was like these threshold repeats on the other week. This grass field we ran on, but they're kind of relaxing. They kind of recover you, but you're still getting in some quality work versus just hitting the track and doing some fast intervals. So
yeah, and since you did mention surface, I know this is a common question I get as well. What do you like to tell your runners as far as their threshold work or these tempo runs? Do you like to have them do them on a track or like a flat pathway, or do you have them do them on the road with some, kind of hills in there and different, kind of elevations?
Yeah, that's a good point too. Yeah, honestly, at first, if they can get them done on a flat surface, like usually the road. I mean, granted, I know that's not the best for your body, but just for the most of our lifestyles and everything, that works best. Usually, just like on a road, trying to not actually have hills at first, and we can definitely incorporate it. But that's again going to be like when you get good at like feeling this threshold pace off, because technically, if you have hills thrown into this threshold pace now, your pace is going to be changing to really keep the same effort level, right? Right now where I live, it's very hilly everywhere I go. So if I do anything like more up pace, which I get to do finally, a little tiny bit, like really my pace is actually going all over the place. But that can be fun, and especially if you have a hilly course. Like I think it can be helpful to add in hills on your run. If you have a flat course, you don't necessarily need to probably do it. But I usually do that. If someone wants to go to a track, to get them in for the pacing, that's cool. I try to keep just the intervals on a track if people want to not be turning in circles for every workout, but it all depends on the athlete and their goals and everything. If you're training for a mile, like Coach Lou is going to train for a mile, apparently. We need to talk a little more. He said he wants to break 5 in the mile. So if you're doing that, maybe you're on the track a little bit more. So,
Yeah.
But yeah.
No, absolutely. I know he was asking me about that with you. And did you actually break 5, or that was a goal you had
No,
set?
that was my
I know that's the name of your
goal.
podcast.
Yes, that's where like that started. So I got back into track when I was 30. So at age 30, I was like, I feel like I only have a few years left to like see if I could ever break this goal that I never broke in college. So I was like definitely in the best shape of my life well, it's almost 2 years ago now, but a year and a half ago. And so that was a goal. I was going to see how close I could get to it. At least I felt like at least like a 5:08 was possible for sure. Wasn't mentally to where I thought I could break it yet, but so if I get back there, I probably won't share much on it, honestly, because this has been a pretty big setback this past year. But we'll see. I don't have much time left of my peak endurance at that level. But
Hey, you can just set your goals on some longer distances, right? We do
Yes.
know that, running is one of those sports that you can age gracefully, and,
Yes.
you can actually improve in your half marathon and
Mm-hmm.
marathon, times as we age.
That's the exciting part. Like 10K and on, I can definitely still PR in, and that's exciting. So, and I've only done 1 marathon, so.
Nice. And so kind of the final stretch here, if you will, is always the question I ask about like misconception. And for you, I think it's really, what would you say the misconception about, running a tempo run or a threshold run. What would you say the misconception about this type of run is?
I guess just basically what I hit on the whole time is just that it's always at the same pace, or like, like a tempo run could be any distance, really that threshold pace is a specific pace. I would really say that, and that like it is more than just like, oh, we're going to go out at like a tempo, just do a tempo run, like just knowing that there's a threshold pace and there's a purpose to it. And it's very specific window of time that you would, be in. Yeah, I would say that's the biggest thing. I was trying to think of something different just because we hit on it, but I really can't. I don't think.
Yeah, and I would, also I guess just like feed off of that is that, this should be a run that's happening once a week and not every single time you go out there.
Yes,
So
yes.
slow down, slow down,
every
people.
Run. Not really. Like I said, most of my clients that come in that and honestly, like they have like an athletic background. A lot of times they've done other sports, but they're getting into running. Like their runs are all at threshold pace. That's literally what they're doing, and that's why it's so hard, or that's why they can't get faster. I'm like, okay, this is why you think running is hard. Like you got to slow down. You only do this once a week instead.
Right. Exactly. And yeah, no, you shared some, great information here on what a tempo run is, how long we should, be able to run this type of run. Is it the same as a threshold run? And we talked about that's not the same, technically. And, how do we figure out our pace? We talked about that. We dropped the calculator, and how folks can figure that out. And then, how many times we should program it. Then you shared some great progressions and how, we progress this as our running fitness improves. And I'm sure there are going to be many runners who learned a bunch from you today, Kristen. And if they'd like to learn more, where can our Healthy Runner community connect with you?
Yeah, best places are on Instagram. It's Kristin_Run Your Life. Otherwise on Facebook, Kristen Schultz. And I'm sure you'll have probably like my name and stuff in the show notes. I could spell it out too. Those are the best places. Or if you want to follow me on Breaking Five, a running podcast, you can also follow me there. It's running based, but I'm also doing some bit on clinician based because I have a number of clinicians I work with too. So it's a little bit of a mix of both over there. So
yeah, so that's actually really cool. And I guess I probably should have shared this, probably should share this in the beginning on how we originally met. So Kristen and I have the same business coaches. And so we met in one of those programs. And Kristen's doing something really neat where, she not only works with runners, but she works with clinicians, who are runners and they would like to work with more runners. Can you tell, if there are some clinicians, whether they're PT, or you tell me if there's other disciplines that you work with, but, if they're listening to this right now and they were considering like, hey, maybe I want to turn, kind of the passion I have for running into, whether it's, a little side hustle, some money on the side, or it's just something I'm interested in, like, hey, I want to program for other runners. Can you tell us a little bit about what that looks like?
Yeah. So to answer your first question, you're like, is it just clinicians? I mean, it's really whoever this would be right for, but a lot of times it's physical therapists, dietitians, personal trainers. Those tend to be like the most common people. But really it's anyone that wants to. So the main basic of it is learning how to write running programs, right? So in a way, hey, learn about the threshold run. We're kind of talking about this, but actually learn how to like program that into runners' plans. But it's learning how to write running programs. A lot of times the people I work with are clinicians like Dwayne who work with runners, but then they're like, hey, like I see that runners are getting, injured and they're coming back to me still because they don't train correctly. They're crazy and they go train at threshold pace all the time. So I need to learn how to like actually coach them, and like they trust me and want to work with me, but I'm just like letting them go do their thing or find a coach online or whatever. Like I help them so they can actually coach them, whether they want it to be all online or they work in a clinic and they want to do some of this, whether it's a side hustle. I have people that have turned this into a full-time business. I have a new grad that has done that recently, which is really awesome. But learn how to do that, but then also in the business side, what me and Dwayne have had to learn, right, on how to get your first 2 to 5 clients. Now it can definitely be more than that. Like I shared, I had one client that had 16 clients, but learn the basics of business, sales and marketing. How do I find clients online as well? So honestly, that was never a plan of mine. It just kind of came about. I started getting asked and I was like, well, I'll put a program together. And then it's actually been where my business has shifted to a little bit more, in addition to helping runners, but it's like, I've almost been like pushed, like, I mean, I love it, but like people just ask, I'm like, okay, well, I guess this is the direction I'm going. So that's what else I do on top of helping runners themselves. So it's been fun, have a little bit mix of everything.
And that's like, I just think it's such a need out there, honestly, because, in today's day of healthcare, things are a lot different than when I first graduated 18 years ago from PT school and working in
Yeah.
clinics. Things are so much more faster paced in orthopedic and sports medicine settings, and we're
Yeah.
getting less and less time to spend with patients. And there's less and less that you can do to help from the stuff outside of actually treating the body part or the injury,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And I think most of us as PTs, we want to do as much as possible for our patients and help them. And I think what you're offering, PTs, and whether or not they are incorporating into their kind of, their full-time job, or they are doing it as, a part-time job on the side, but being able to really take that next level, like that you and I have that fulfillment where you're not only getting someone out of pain, but you're actually now seeing them reach, their marathon goal, their half marathon goal, or get faster as a runner, because you're actually
Yeah.
combining those elements of, the rehab with the actual run plan is like super important. And then I just can't underscore enough, how much I've learned, right, on the business side of things, like for you to be able to do that as a run coach and be able to show others like what you've done and all the content I know that you have for these clinicians is just phenomenal. So there are a lot of like business coaches out there, but the fact that you're specific to running, if you are a clinician and, or a personal trainer, you're RD, and you're considering like doing run coaching as well, like Kristen is your gal, honestly. She's got it all figured out. She's got trainings and like how to do that. And I can't underscore enough, like the marketing side of things and the sales side of things is stuff we don't get as clinicians, like zero in any
Yeah.
of our,
Nope, not
licensure
at all. It's like
programs.
the opposite.
So if you actually want to actually get those clients to work with, Kristen will show you how to do that. So I love your program. I love everything about it. Like I would love to eventually do that in the future. It's just not where I am going right now.
Mm-hmm.
But I love that you're offering that, because I know like so many like students of mine too, like new grads are like out 3 years and they're like, hey man, I got a ton of debt from PT
Yeah.
school, and
Yeah.
unfortunately the salaries out there right now are
Mm-hmm.
not paying that debt off.
Yep.
Like I know when I first, started working, I was doing personal training, right, as my part-time job in
Side.
addition
Yeah.
to working as a PT. But like I would love to be able to work as a run coach right now, right? So yeah, if you're looking to do that, definitely get in touch with Kristen. Again, I'll put all of her information in the show notes. And then I know you had mentioned to me, this will definitely be pertinent for those that are catching this on the Facebook Live, but you do have an upcoming challenge coming up. Can
Yeah.
you mind telling us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So next week, again, this is for the clinicians that might be listening. Next week, November 1st through the 3rd, I'm running a 3-day challenge called the Help More Running Clients Challenge. So, hey, either if you're a clinician or will help more of you listening. But it's all based on exactly what I was just talking about, but the basics of what do you need to do to get started with your business if you want to help runners online. The basics of writing running programs, especially for the average runner you're going to see in the clinic. And then lastly, how to keep those clients as, lifelong clients. One benefit of working with runners, they tend to become like lifelong clients, if they keep wanting to follow a training program. So that would be the 3rd day of what we're going to be covering. But it's just a free challenge I'm putting on in my Facebook group. The Run Coaches and Clinicians Community is what it's called. That's my clinician specific group. And yeah, it's free. So come on by, take the challenge. If you're catching this on the replay or the podcast later and you want access to it, I can probably still get you access to it. It just, be done, but the replays will still be up. But yeah, feel free to reach out about that. And I also do have like an old challenge I give people sometimes called, it was a 5-day challenge, same thing, just a little different content, on helping running clients. So if that's something you're interested in, you can reach out on that too. So But yeah, if you're
Cool.
catching live, come join us live. It's in a week, so it's
Awesome.
soon.
No, it sounds like fun. And I'm sure there's a lot of knowledge that you're going to drop in there, just like you did today. So yeah, thank you again for coming on the Healthy Runner podcast here. This was so informative. I appreciate you taking the time out of your busy day to share with our community.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. This was fun. Like I said, I love talking about this stuff. It's fun to get to talk about it again and get to chat with your community. I love what you're doing. I love like just seeing it keep growing, and you guys are all in great hands. And yeah, so excited for like the running community to become smarter with all that you're doing through this community and your podcast and everything. So it's an honor to be on.
Yeah, no, this has been great. And thank you all for those that either caught the Facebook Live, listened on the podcast, or those who listened to the replay, either within the Healthy Runner Facebook group or Spark Your Training YouTube channel. Remember, every week we go live within our Healthy Runner Facebook group doing live podcast episodes. So check out our events tab within our group to see the guests that we have lined up for you and the topics that you'll be interested in. And, come join the conversation, get your questions answered. And as always, guys, let's just stay active, stay healthy, and just keep running. Until next time.